Greetings. I'm Dr. Sundiata Keita Cha-Jua, and this is RealTalk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. Today's guest is someone that I worked with about 20 years ago, Dr. Charles Cappy Pinderhughes. Dr. Pinderhughes was born in the Boston area, and he joined the movement in high school. His parents regularly hosted fundraisers for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In 1963 and through 1965, he worked in SNCC's Boston and Pine Bluff, Arkansas offices. In Arkansas, he took part in voter registration drives. Frustrated with the pace of change, he moved leftward and joined the Black Panther Party. He became lieutenant of information in the New Haven party of the Black Panther Party, in the New Haven chapter of the Black Panther Party. And around 1970, about the time of the Black Panther Constitutional Convention, Brother Cappy left the party, largely, if I understand it correctly, in dispute with Eldridge Cleaver's essay on lumpen ideology, and somewhat frustrated with the limitations, or I should say the authoritarianism of vanguardist approaches. He co-founded the Boston Black Marxist Collective the Struggle Collective, and he edited its revolutionary nationalist newspaper, Struggle, between 1972 and 1974. During the party building phase of the New Left, he joined the October League, or essentially Struggle merged into the October League, which also was later known as the Communist Party Marxist-Leninists. And he served as a member and emerged as a local leader in Baltimore and Atlanta between 1975 and 1981. In 1998, he joined the United Black Left formation, the Black Radical Congress. That's where I met Dr. Pinderhughes. In that time, while a member of BRIC, the BRC, he served as National Cyber Organizer from 1998 to 2005. And in 2009, after having gone back to graduate school, he earned a PhD in Sociology from Boston College for a dissertation entitled 21st Century Change, the Continuing Relevance of Internal Colonialism Theory. Since 2011, he has worked as a sociology professor at Essex County College. Welcome, my brother. It's good to see you, man. It's been at least 20 years, so pleasure.
Good, Tony. Yeah, I'm glad to see you too. I mean, we're still standing, and some of our comrades are not.
That's right. That's right. But not only are we still standing, we're still getting our cuts in. We fight. That's what matters.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, Brother Cappy, Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation is on the Black Power Media Network. And we're dedicated to the idea that we have to put out a radical Black analysis, right? Our goal is to be like CNN 24 hours a day of radical Black news, information, and analysis. We have aspirations, right? Now, the way my show works, I'm interested in, obviously, the political, but I like to get to the political through the personal. So, as a devotee of William Cross's negrescence theory, the theory of the Negro to Black conversion, Black identity formation, I like to talk about how one becomes Black, how one becomes radical, because we see it as a process of self-transformation, right? And so in that spirit, I want to point out that I tend to interrupt to seek clarification and sometimes just to disagree, right? To foment the sharpness of the exchange, because we want this to be a conversation. But what I want to know from you is this. can you talk to me about your formation? You grew up in the Boston area. If I got the biography correct, you can spare me that around age 3 or maybe third grade, I'm not sure. You moved to Washington, D.C. for a period, and then you came back to Roxbury. And so, what I'd like you to do is talk about your early life growing up and let's focus on the formative years, Roxbury forward, and particularly your high school experience, and talk about uh, how you came to understand race, blackness, African American culture, racial oppression, and yeah, how did the time period and your class background affect these things?
Well, I guess I'll start out with the correction that I was born in Freedman's Hospital in
Which is
DC. But I was raised in Boston after 18 months when we moved up when I was about 18 months old. And we lived in Cambridge through the second grade. My father got sick and was hospitalized with tuberculosis, and we moved back to DC for support for a year, and then moved back to Boston. And then our family was growing quickly. I'm the oldest of now 5 children, and so we moved to Roxbury, and finished growing up there from the 4th grade on. My parents they gave me strong moral values. They were quiet but strongly supportive of a lot of the um, the Black liberal and even slightly radical activists in the 50s and 60s Boston.
okay. I want to ask you specifically, how do they come to host fundraisers for SNCC? Are they part of a Friends of SNCC chapter in the Boston area?
They were a little bit older. They were older than most people in SNCC, but I don't know. I have to ask my mother that question. She's still around at age 100,
Good.
which is the good news.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I will ask her about that. But anyway, actually, the one that I remember, it was a fundraiser where the comedian Dick Gregory came to speak. And
What is this? What year are we talking about?
60, I'm thinking spring of 63. Yes,
He's
spring.
at the height of his fame.
Yeah, and he gave it up to devote himself to the freedom movement. A very very admirable gesture. And so there were some posters left over, and I called myself taking them back to the office, and I just kept on going back. So I was a part of Friends of SNCC and Boston, out of the Cambridge office in Harvard Square, and then I also worked with Northern Student Movement while I was in high school. Graduated high school and went south to Arkansas. So there's a story I like to tell, which I think is relevant here. You talk about formational stuff. I was really trying to find myself and really embrace the political movement and be dedicated. And so the movement was, talking nonviolence, and I became a pacifist. I was, and so when my number came up for, well, actually it wasn't a number. This is before they implemented the student lottery. I mean, got rid of the student lottery, and I stayed out of school after high school. I had have to face the draft. I was going in as a pacifist.
So when you say you became
they didn't need me at the time. There were not enough people making noise about that to sell this. That was just too much trouble. So they gave me a 1Y and went on at that point. What's that?
let me. What's the process? I mean, did you
I'm about to get there.
Pacifist or okay? Yeah,
but I wanted to tell you that. So, but the thing that where the thread began to unravel was when I on my way to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, I had to do an orientation with SNCC, and they had set up a really good radicalization process and worked brilliantly in my case. So we had a vigil that was set up outside the Justice Department on the eve of the first anniversary of the disappearance of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. The three civil rights workers were found buried in an earthen dam the summer before. That was the Mississippi Freedom Summer, right? And that was the big thing that happened there. So I was going down there the next year, and this is a couple of months after Selma, and before the Voting Rights Act was passed. And so we had the vigil, and the next morning we had a prearranged appointment with John Doerr. Now I think John Doerr was in on this, because when he came to the 50th anniversary of SNCC, he was welcomed as a fellow traveler, right? Anyway, so but I haven't had the chance to ask him about this. So we went to this appointment, and SNCC primed us with these questions, and the one I remember, I'm about to tell you. But before we could ask any questions of John Doerr, in walks Nicholas Katzenbach, the Attorney General of the United States of America. And so we put the question to him. And the question I remember was, why won't the Justice Department authorize the FBI agents to make on-the-spot arrests in the presence of the commission of a felony, as is authorized by the U.S. Criminal Code? And the Attorney General of the United States said to this room full of black and white youth that were going south, mostly college students, going south to risk their lives, it's our policy in civil rights cases to take notes and submit them to the local jury.
In which case there will be no.
I said to get your behind goodbye. So I mean, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Let's rethink the power dynamics here, and what something else is going on. So that began my move away from pacifism.
Okay. Now,
so I went back to I started school after staying out a year, and but I became the campus radical, doing all kinds of stuff. I admit to having fun at what we did. That's a bunch of stories that I can tell some stories, but I dropped out of school second semester sophomore year when I found a movement job, and it was doing power structure research, and I wanted to research. And by that time I was pretty much a socialist.
Who were you doing power structure research for?
Well,
to our audience,
out of school to do was to coordinate the Boston Area Radical Research Center.
Okay, but explain to our audience what power structure research is.
Power structure research is trying to figure out who controls what, and who are the people behind the front. Now, for me, the best I can explain it, maybe help you understand it by explaining my project. The project that I had to adopt the project as a coordinator. So I said, okay, well, let me figure out who owns WILD, the black radio station in Boston. And the radio station records are very public records.
Right.
And I found out that Richard Nixon's best friends were buying WILD. They were buying actually several other radio stations too, WAFO, the UFO in Buffalo, WAMO, AMFM, and
So this is urban radio and black-owned radio.
radio. But then there was also another station, which I think that was the reason why they bought it, because WLTO in Miami, WLTO, the announcement of the prospective sale was a week before the '68 election. The week following the election, there was an announcement that the WLTO was changing from country western to Spanish speaking. And if you paid attention to the names that came up of the actual plumbers in Watergate, there's a little bit of Cubans in there, right? Anyway, so I went and tried to sell the story. Because in the power structure research, there were two corporations, Cypress Broadcasting and the parent company Cypress Communications, which was this mysterious thing called cable, right? What was cable at that time? And there were 3 duplicates on the boards. 3 people from the same law firm, Nixon, Mudge, etc. And Mitchell, who became Attorney General, was one of them. Right? So I went. I got a story. The Globe wouldn't touch it. Black newspaper wouldn't touch it. Say Brother wouldn't touch it. At that time they were trying to that Black News, that show they had hired a director, and he was struggling to try to learn the mechanics, and wasn't really paying attention to those kind of questions. A year later, he ended up getting sacked because he was covering rebellions too literally, and playing stuff on the news that was the excuse they used to sack him. Anyway, so I ended up taking it to the Black Panther Party, writing it up. They said, "Well, sure, write it up like a Panther stuff." So I put in the appropriate rhetoric, and it got published in the June issue of the Black Panther. My name is in there. But then they said, "Why don't you come do more information with us?" And they recruited me into the party. And I was ready. Mm-hmm. So
now, talk about some of your time in the party, and then explain to me the context in which you leave the party and where your political path goes after that.
Okay. Well, so when I was I joined the party, like I said, I was sympathetic to the Panthers by the fall of 68. And I had actually, I'd heard about the Panthers. I'd made a medallion that had a Panther on it. I used to wear it around campus. And then I stopped when I heard somebody say, there's a room around here, there's Panthers are on the campus, right? I wasn't trying to impersonate anybody. So I was like, I held that off. I stopped wearing that. But I was not, I was not hell bent on getting in there. I had gone through my decolonization process. I hear what you're saying about from Negro to Black. Mm-hmm. I'm a Fanonian. Okay.
Repeat that again. You're
a Fanonian. In other words, the work of the author of Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon, seems to me to be a key in understanding the psychology of African Americans.
Well, absolutely.
Over 40 years. And anybody
heavily from Fanon.
What's it?
Heavily from Fanon.
Yes, I've been saying for over 40 years that anybody who's engaged in treating people of African American descent and who has not read Frantz Fanon is committing malpractice.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, so in addition to Fanon, what are there other readings
Are there individuals that you engage with, classes you're taking that prepare you to make the ideological shift to the Panther Party?
No, I think the thing is biggest thing with an experience. I took a work term in Chicago, January to April 1968, and got really clear about some contradictions. And I went through my own decolonization process there.
So what was it about that experience in Chicago that helped speed up?
Well, I was attending a lot of the political, political rallies and that were going on, and I was there when King was killed. I was actually on my way to a draft counseling meeting at the American Friends Service Committee when walking under the L when I heard that King had been assassinated. I stopped another black from trying to assault somebody white on the train, and then, he got to the meeting, and the white leadership of the draft council, they're all crying, and I'm like, I don't got a tear. I'm angry, So that was all part of that. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I came back to campus about less than a month later, and I had to be talked out of becoming a terrorist. Okay, I mean, I wanted to jack up. I'll just leave. But that's how crazy you get. If you want an illustration of a quick illustration of Frantz Fanon's work, take a look at the movie Battle of Algiers, which is free online.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a scene in there where these two guys, they're just regular guys, they hijack an ambulance and they're going down the street, firing at the settlers, and they run out of bullets, and one sees a bunch of them at the bus stops. They run them over, and they're willing, they're on a suicide mission. So what the heck?
Yeah.
But that's what that it can have that initial impact on you. As Fanon says in the very first page of his first chapter on concerning violence or violence, depending on the translation you read, decolonization is a violent process, even if it takes place in a boardroom or a country club. At the very least, in other words, it's psychologically violent. Right. And I went beyond that. I finished the 2 terms school after that. But in one of them, I actually finally read Wretch of the Earth. It had been recommended to me a year before by some sub-Saharan African students, but I didn't get around to read it. And I ended up reading it and presenting on it and rebellion in Newark, because I was in a class on supposed to be social deviance, and the professor said, I think the deviant can impact. It was an exceptional course because deviance is a pretty backwards frame in sociology. But I married rebellion in Newark with Wretched, and that married my mind to the relevance of Fanon in the United States. I mean, permanently. And then, like I said, eventually I went on. That was my last semester in school and so forth. In the party, I focused on information, and so I had, I mean, in a situation, what do they say in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king?
Yeah.
Well, that was me. I ran a mimeograph machine in a high school youth group, so I had skills.
Yeah.
I mean, hardly any compared to what but compared to other people in the party. I didn't, and so I had a few skills, and I drew on them, and I built upon them. My office in the in Black Boston Area Radical Research Center was in a corner of New England Free Press. So I had, I got some advice about printing when I Panther paper. Then was able to escalate it quickly from a mimeograph sheet to a professionally laid out insert comparable to the the old TV guides.
Yeah.
And I created the People's News Service, which promptly became copied by Panthers around the country. I was going to Panther reunions, and people who never knew me knew about the People's News Service. Yeah. So and then I eventually when the next spring, this is 70, when you don't really always know how to anticipate what things happen. When Eldridge came out with the on lumpen ideology, I experienced something that hadn't happened openly with me. I came under political attack as being from a petty bourgeois. What? This is inside the party. Yeah. I mean, I'm a cadre. I'm doing good work. I can't because I'm petty bourgeois. I'm a class enemy. That was the way some people took it. And so I came under attack. I wasn't very functional, losing sleep, and fell asleep on guard duty. And they said, we're gonna suspend you. Don't have anything to do with the party. Go back to Boston. I said, no, I want to be part of the party. So instead of 2 weeks, they gave me a month working suspension. I worked that off, and not thinking that was just something that was happening in New Haven, and then the phenomenon started rearing its head there too. And so as a result, I stopped. I was suspended. I left, and then I was a fan of the party even at that point of the program, and it wasn't until the following spring I got a chance. I was hacking with driving cab, and then I was hoping to try to do a bookstore or something, and I got sick with this pneumonia, and I decided to write that letter to the Black Panther Party that I wanted to
responding to.
Well, I wanted to just make a few suggestions, and I was still thinking the party is really something I loved, and I wanted to improve it.
Mm-hmm.
But I got out in those days we had the little red book in our pockets.
Right.
We weren't dressed for party work unless we had Mao Zedong's quotations in our pocket. And I got out the book and I started looking for the quotes a couple quotes I might want to use. And I realized I wanted to know what the background was. And so I read myself back using the citations all the way from the red book to his selected works, to Stalin and Lenin, to Marx and Engels. Then I got to Hegel. I said, screw Hegel. His dialectic idealism is not for me. But what I didn't realize was that I was taking notes furiously the whole time. And then, I looked at them and I gave them numbers and, for outline, and reassembled that into and wrote a paper that was 85 pages long. And we're talking about 10-point pike attack.
And so this is a critique.
It was called
ideology, the ideology.
Not only criticism of the ideology, but a letter of criticism and suggestion to the QP and the Black Panther Party. There was stuff in there about cadre training, about democracy and organization, very important. And I called for a united, the Friday Front. At least 7 of the party points could have been embraced by the NAACP. And if they had adjusted it somewhat, the party could have been positioned to lay out what I call the National Alliance for Black Community Control, and actually even channel the electoral political selections for the primaries through that organization and dictating who ended up getting the party endorsement and not just party endorsement, but endorsement by this coalition, this United Front coalition.
So let me ask you this.
But they didn't listen. This long story short, they didn't listen. I don't know if they ever read it. But I had to start a Black Marxist organization, and I didn't even know another Black Marxist who thought like me at that time.
But that document that you produced does precede Huey P. Newton's critique of the party in the piece that is Eldridge Cleaver's defection from the Black Panther Party and the Black Panther Party defection from the Black community, which I think comes out in 71. Are there any things in there that are similar?
No, because I did not. I was not critiquing Eldridge in that. I was primarily trying to. I proposed. There were certain errors that did perceive the party making at the time, in terms of the Black Liberation Army was in the Panther literature, but I said, look, what we need to do is make it a Black Labor Army, a mass organization of the party that does public construction work, proletarianizes the lumpen proletariat, and has, but it's a mass organization of the party, so it has political officers and so forth and so on, and does mass work, and then you can pick and choose the people from those ranks that you want to do. But the party didn't understand the difference between mass organization and cadre organization. A cadre organization, but the cadre organization is Jesus and the 12 disciples. Or the Catholic priesthood now.
But I get your point, but just for historical purposes, the piece by Newton on the defection of Cleaver,
that was 71.
From the Black community.
Later, that
critique of Cleaver, but the other part, the most salient part, is a critique of party practice.
Yeah, mine is really not attached to that. Right. And it took place after that stuff came out, after the split became clear. And it was, but anyway, so once I realized that the changes that what the party would need to make in order to become more relevant and continue to advance in leading the Black liberation movement, I determined that wasn't going to happen at that point. And I'll say, so, okay, so what
the October league deal for you?
Well, I'm going to get you there. Okay, so I attempted to do a couple of things coalitionally, and it didn't really work. And then I decided to. I even worked with the people who split from the Panthers, who published Right On, the New York Panther paper after the split. I worked with them, the Revolutionary People's New Communication Network. I worked with them, but that I did. I after that I focused on creating a newspaper, black newspaper, black revolutionary nationalist newspaper. My understanding at that time was I was a Marxist, and I thought of myself as a revolutionary nationalist as well.
Explain it for our audience, because most people would argue that there's a clear distinction.
Well,
even though there's an influence.
Well, here's the point, that if you are a Marxist and you are absolutely prioritizing your people's struggle, you're at least a black patriot. At the very least, you're a black patriot. And in my case, I went further. I had a rationale now of the basis of revolutionary nationalism that encompassed all nationalisms have a form of national identity and a program for self-determination, and that's different for the Black Panthers or than it was for the Republic of New Africa, than it was for, say, the Garveyites even. So you have a different national identity, different program for self-determination for each of those. But then there's the other six of determine the revolutionary character in part. There's struggle, the unity, democratic centralism, non-exploitative economy, solidarity, and alliance. Those are the principles that I cobbled together we used that internally for a little while, but mostly and started focusing more on more orthodox Marxist stuff. And I was never engaged egoistically to push my stuff. So I look, okay, let's go with the masters, the people who have made revolution before, or I mightily attempted it. Let's follow. Let's. But that's there. I was just looking at my. I did. Well, after we launched Struggle, I did take a master's in political science from Goddard College's Third World Studies program, and the paper that the master's thesis that I did was basically Black survival as a political science. No, I'm sorry, that was a course I taught at Tufts, and they replaced it with a course in African textiles and basket weaving. So the story is in my first public. That story leads my my discussion of Robert L. Allen's book, Black Waking the Capitalist America. So anyway, but so where was I? Oh, I was talking about how I got to CPML, the Communist Party. Yeah. So we worked on the newspaper for a couple of years, and then we started doing a lot of mass work. And as we started growing and recruiting more people to the collective.
So the newspaper struggle lasted for
it was going on for 3 years. It started in '72, and
how often was it published?
Admittedly, occasionally.
Okay.
And we started off with a pretty informal. Spare change was what we asked for. But I mean that came from when I was selling papers. I wasn't pretty like the sisters, so I had to work, and I figured out how to. I would go to a bus stop, and and the paper's free, and its information costs 25 cents. Take a look, because so I'd have 3 or 4 people sitting there reading the paper while they're waiting for the bus, and then other people could say, "Oh, there must be something in there. Let me have it. Let me see what it is." So I was able to do a pretty good job selling papers that way.
That was. I mean, that was an essential part of party work. Selling.
Oh, well, it was. It's one of the ways that we fundraise. That we did. We fundraise a lot of ways, including some stories I can't tell on the air. But anyway,
We're not.
but I'll leave that alone. I did not. That wasn't me. But some people I know were able to had the chops to be able to do all kinds of stuff. Anyway, this organization matured. We even went to several of us went to the Which Road for Black Liberation in '74.
Okay.
At Howard University. And there's a tape out there of that.
Yeah.
I heard that there's a
Sure.
it's a place where I confront Solly Carmichael with asking some questions about the contradictions in his perspective from my perspective as a person African American working here as opposed to doing the All African People's Revolutionary Party approach of organized first from Mother Africa. But then later that summer, the Struggle Collective merged with
But was in October League.
It's October League. And
what attracted you guys to October
League? The reason why that happened was of all the organizations in the new communist movement, they had the best, the most mature perspective as a multinational organization on the national question and specifically on Black liberation. Remember, they're the people who recruited Harry Haywood.
Right. They helped him write Black Bolshevik.
And I got to work with Harry in Atlanta for a little while and learned about, he was once bitten, twice shy. He'd been bitten before by having his words used against you. So I remember spending one afternoon spending 2 hours on a paragraph because he wanted to say it right and not have it be blown back in his face.
So here's the thing. I don't know how many of our audience know who Harry Haywood.
Okay. So Harry Haywood was
biography.
Class youth recruited by the Black
African Blood Brotherhood.
African Blood Brotherhood. Thank you. And recruited into the Communist Party in the early 1920s. Gets sponsored to go to college in the Soviet Union by the party. Goes there, comes back, and leads the party's movement embracing self-determination for the Negro nation in the South in the Congresses in 28 and 30. And that laid the basis for them being able to really reach many more people. In the 20s, they only had maybe 50 blacks in the whole party. But there were thousands that went through the party during the Great Depression, and they were ready for that. It really enabled them to do a lot of work, and they laid a huge foundation for the civil rights movement because a lot of people had experience with that. I found I think it was a House of Un-American Activities Committee document on the history of the Communist Party claimed that in 1 year in Birmingham, 5,000 people gained and went and entered and left. 5,000 people in 1 year, in one city. So a
third of the members at the 1932 convention, actually more than a third, 14,000 delegates, and 5,000 of them were black. So
So there was a lot of training that was going on, but of course because of the rampant anti-communism, the civil rights movement shut that stuff down. Rosa Parks became this little seamstress who just was talking, and said of the radical that she really was.
So,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well,
if there's two things that people should go look for in terms of Harry Haywood, where would you point it? Somebody wants to know something about Harry Haywood.
You want to know something about Harry Haywood?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he authored Negro Liberation in '48. There's copies of that out. I think there's a collected works. You need to pay close attention because I think there's maybe 2 volumes. You want to look and see which one has the more comprehensive collection.
But wouldn't you sit on the Black Bolshevik?
Well, Black Bolshevik is good. Black Bolshevik is excellent. That'll give you help. Look, it'll tell you about the race riot he walked into in Texas, and when he was in World War I. He was in the Merchant Marines in World War II, but in World War I, he tells you, he talks about it and a lot of the issues that were going on, and of course, the black soldiers were getting treated terroristically, and they weren't standing for it, and that's what why stuff jumped off. Anyway, look, I can me, I can keep you to midnight. So,
well, I actually I'm looking at the time, so I want to shift and
sure.
in October, and I want to talk about really why you're here, right?
Right.
I put you on to talk about internal colonialism.
Okay.
You wrote a dissertation.
So I wrote a dissertation, but look, something. It's every now and then some of us find that we find ourselves in a situation where we say, damn, I was born or trained to get to this point.
Yeah.
And that's I kind of think about it like that. But because I mean, it wasn't just that I read Fanon, but I read it with Rebellion in Newark as it was fresh off the press, and it married my understanding of Fanon with
the African American.
So what then happened? As a sociologist, I was trying to do my due diligence as a grad student and so forth, and I ended up writing an area paper on internal colonialism, and I kept on finding.
Explain the theory for the audience.
So basically, the question is, I'll just reverse it. Why do we call the areas where we live barrios and ghettos and reservations? They're internal colonies. And the way I get to that is you go back to what is a colony in the first place, from the point of view of the colonized, mind you. And colony is settler confiscated land and the land on which colonized reside. And if you don't disagree there, you have nothing left to say that can beat me in this, because the settler the land on which the colonized reside, as long as the colonized are not exterminated, it's wherever they're systematically subordinated and geographically focused, that's where the colony is. And when the American Revolution occurred and the colonizers declared independence, what happened to the conditions of the colonized? They got expanded by the Louisiana Purchase.
Okay, now,
right, and so forth, and so
let me push you.
I'm going to say this final connection.
Okay.
So this says that land that we're living on in ghettos and barrios and reservations, even if we move, if we're reconcentrated, systematically subordinated, the colony has moved. That's okay. So that's how that. So that means that instead of the analogy that historically has plagued presentations of this, if you say all of African America is one single colony, the Boston blacks and the Seattle blacks and the Houston blacks, they're all in one colony together. Well, that's not a colony. That's an analogy. So that's the basis on which internal colonialism gets dismissed by people who are outside of that experience. I was driven to go back to that because I'm still scratching myself. It still feels like we're colonized, and I remembered my experience from the reading Fanon before, and I said it doesn't feel like that's going away. There's something about that. And then when I went back and was reanalyzed internal colonialism to say, okay, this is more durable. And like I said, I don't think anyone can address the question, because to me, you have to answer. If you think that Black people are no longer colonized, then what is the process by which the colonized, the colony ended? And I know that there's three ways.
Well, here's what I want to pose.
But go ahead. You go ahead.
People don't start with the notion that we are colonized. So they would start with a notion, they talk about slavery, but they wouldn't talk about slavery as a colonial process. And so I think that part of what you got to do is demonstrate why African Americans should be considered a colonized people. And I want to put it in this context, right, in terms of competing theories. Clearly, from the mid-'60s, right, from Black Power by Carmichael Touré and Charles Hamilton, they make the argument that institutional racism has another name, internal colonialism, right? Now, from that moment all the way into the mid-1980s, internal colonial theory in some form is dominant amongst Black political activists, the radical activists, the nationalists, right? And scholars. Since then, people look at you as if you're the village idiot when you talk about internal colonialism. And here's the point here, right? None of the young activists associated with the so-called Black Lives Matter thing speak to internal colonialism. This book by Isabel Wilkerson entitled Caste was a New York Times bestseller, won the Pulitzer Prize. And this notion, you see the notion of caste creeping up more and more in the language of Black public intellectuals. So you got to convince me. Well, you don't have to convince me, because I'm a diehard believer in internal colonialism. Maybe slightly different from you, but we've got to wage a struggle to clarify that the form of oppression that our people experience is in fact internal colonialism. It's not caste. And as my young people and my students tell me, second-class citizenship, which I have to turn to H. Rap Brown, right? Jamil Al-Amin, he says you can't be a little pregnant.
You can't be what?
You can't be a little pregnant.
Okay.
You're either a full-fledged citizen or you're not. So how do you get in the struggle with these folks who think that there's something out there called Jim Crow, second-class citizenship, or caste?
Well, first of all, let's be clear that the analyses of racial capitalism it's been catching hold, and this is a form of analyzing racial capitalism. Okay,
but none of the people who talk about racial capitalism talk about internal colonialism.
Well, not yet, no. Let me just point out to you and the audience that one of the things I found out when I was in grad school at age 50, I found out I got medically diagnosed with ADD. And now one of the things that means for me is that when I'm focused on only one thing, I can really do a lot. I do excellent things. But when I'm juggling, I'm mediocre at best. And so the typical role that the scholar plays is to juggle many things. Okay, and I can't do that. So I'm teaching now, but I'm moving to focus on my writing, because I can't write and teach myself. That doesn't work for me. So I'm going to be out there doing this in the first place. But from the time of you got to remember that mainstream social scientists have been looking for alternatives. Even when they anointed Robert Browner, a white sociologist, as being the spokesperson for internal colonialism in sociology, he then had a horrible time getting tenure at Berkeley.
Yeah.
They made him pay for it, so he gave up. He gave up even talking about it, using an analysis after the mid '70s. So then you have people like William Judith Wilson come in with he just starts talking about oppression deep in the South after the Revolutionary War. Doesn't bother to address the question at all. He avoids it, and he was allowed to. So all of those are pieces of what's happened. So caste is an alternative. It says, oh, Black people are permanently put in this position, not that question of struggle. And the other piece to that, and it's an important piece, one of the questions I get asked, and it took me a while to figure out, how do you prove internal colonialism?
Yeah.
And the proof is simply this: whenever you have a group of people who are systematically subordinated in every class, that's you're talking about, if they're geographically focused and systematic subordination includes the subordination of every class, that's internal colonialism. Now, and in the case of the black bourgeoisie, the way that they're subordinated is different from the other classes. Right. They are not allowed to be full bourgeoisie, to be defining and controlling. They haven't even been able to operate as a full-fledged bourgeoisie, and in terms of their own class identity. The best they can do is identify with white bourgeoisie and work either in that system or work within that system. In terms of internal colonialism, they can't even be a native bourgeoisie that like some of the African countries that can at least declare a nominal independence and then take the profits of extraction that they've allowed from the multinationals, and not feed them back to the masses. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I got three questions that I want to throw at you.
Three questions. Okay.
and the last one is going to culminate in me reading a quote from Keita Taylor. Okay, so the first question is this: caste is clearly becoming a prevalent theory to explain the African American condition and situation. I need you to explain why caste is not the appropriate understanding. I'm not even going to raise this notion of second-class citizenship because it's simply silly and is not worthy of theoretical engagement, right? So why doesn't caste explain the African American condition, and why is internal colonialism the best explanation for that condition? That's the first question. After you answer that, we'll move through the others.
Well, see, now I got to explain all about internal colonialism, especially my approach. So when I went back, when I looked at internal colonialism, I elaborated 8 points myself. They include looking at not only the definition that I just gave you of what it is, but saying that look that the question of what is the role of class, and what is and that there's intersectionality as a part of that, and then there's a question of the role in the economy of the dominant country, and I argue that people want to say, argue that it has to be a super exploitation or you don't, it doesn't count. Well, look, Native Americans are pushed aside to the side and just left on the reservations, not
right. They're not exploited.
so well. They're exploited, but
possessed and appropriated.
The most important thing was the
production relationship.
And so the question is what is the relationship? Is there's a particular dominated relationship of the colonized to the economy of the major
To the colonized.
of the dominant country, and as long as it has a role there, that that's the key. And for many colonies, it's like, oh, we're producing the rubber for the British Empire, so and so forth and so on. So you have that. There are questions of how does it fit with other theories of oppression, and also that the question of I think it's maybe the most important point. How do you abolish a colony? Since they've been around for 4 centuries, so that it's damn durable condition. And there's only 3 ways that I've calculated you can abolish a colony. One is ethnic cleansing, but the second is what happened to what I would call the Jewish, German, Irish, and Italian internal colonies of the early 20th century. That spontaneous collective assimilation. That's not happening with Black people, and many other people of color either, anytime soon. So the third possibility is governmental policy, proactive policies of equality of results that abolish the differences between the dominant society and those of the formerly colonized group. You may still have an ethnic enclave, but it's no longer subordinated in distinction from. So you're talking about an equality of result that includes the same, essentially the same infant mortality and maternal mortality rates, unemployment rates, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention police and public safety involvements transformed from what they are now. So this fits with reparations. Although I'm an advocate of collective reparations, not just advocating for reparations. I think that plays into the people who want to say you're just looking for a check.
So let me throw this at you.
Sure.
In terms of the abolition of a colonial relationship, would you say that the French in Quebec inside Canada, that is an example of, at one point, the French were dominated by the English in such a way that one could see it as similar to internal colonialism? Would you say that their control of Quebec and the type of equality that they have achieved within Canada would meet your third criteria of the abolition of the colonial relationship?
While I would need to study it more carefully, it sounds like it might. I'll just go on. I'll just say that, I think that there's a couple of Native American tribes that have actually made the formula of casinos work, but the vast majority of these casinos are not that you're talking about something that's, there are a couple of them that are camped outside the New York metropolitan area. Yeah, when you go to most other parts of the country, they're not drawing on nearly as big a market for the people who they need to take advantage of with their
politically and culture. I mean,
about the gambling, taking advantage of people
politically, they're still subordinated to the U.S. state. So
Yeah.
my second question is, you put an emphasis on territory and geography, and I understand that, right? In my first book, America's First Black Town, Brooklyn, Illinois, I make the argument that the first all-black town has a colonial relationship to the county, and that the capitalists who build around the town and don't put industry there so that they can exploit that labor as a kind of, what would you call it, a commuter labor, because they have to go work in the white towns. But also the county circumscribes the home rule practices of this town. And on 2 occasions, the sheriff invades the town and takes control of the government, right? At 2 historical moments. I describe that as a concise example of internal colonialism. And to some degree, I do agree with you that we have to show the ways in which political subordination works. But here's what I want you to kind of explain, right? Jack Odell, in his classic analysis and argument about internal colonialism for the African American, argues very clearly that territory is simply a stage, and that what's important are the processes, right? Economic exploitation, super exploitation, expropriation, political subordination, cultural imposition and everything destroy, and social ostracization, isolation, etc. So why can you square that difference in terms of his de-emphasis of territory, and territory being almost the most central aspect of your argument?
Well, first of all, I do want to revisit Jack Odell. I've drawn on him before in my work, but I'll have to contextualize. He's writing in a period where the widespread assumption is that is that blacks, the concept of blacks as a single colony.
Yeah.
And I, in my article toward the new theory of internal colonialism, I talk about just how long that is. Since 1830, we've been using the term nation to refer to ourselves. Yeah. Nation within a nation. Delaney and Douglas are using that term.
Well, even moderates. I mean, Richard Allen, right?
Multiple people
is using the notion of nation.
Yeah, multiple people in the Harlem Renaissance were using it. Du Bois actually has an old article in 32 or 33, Negro Nation within a nation, but that's about building cooperatives to survive the
Great Depression.
Yeah. And then by 44 he says, oh well, when he says what are the prospects for the people of color after World War II in a speech in the Caribbean, and he says, well, China's a semi-colony, and it's 44, right? China's a semi-colony, and black people are kind of a semi-colony. And then, of course, by by the 60s, it's domestic colonialism and then internal colonialism by the time of Jack Adele.
Well, I'll give you one even stranger. Mary McLeod Bethune in 1944, because she's beginning to work with what will become the United Nations. So she's in interaction with Africans at that San Francisco Peace Conference that leads to the formation of the United Nations. She describes, after learning about colonialism, she describes the African American condition as a colonial condition. When the Carnegie Foundation was looking for someone to write what would become Murdoch's American Dilemma, they first wanted someone who had knowledge of colonialism.
Well, they were trying to do the right thing. But anyway, so my view is that he was looking at the processes, looking at the things that were going on. But I'm looking at my goal is to trace it undeniably from 1600s to the present day without a break, and to the using the land in which the colonized reside becomes a tool to be able to do that. I mean, the processes, all those processes and the exploitated phenomena are definitely true. They're definitely true.
So you still maintain? Okay, good. Now I want to read.
It's both and it's not either or.
Okay, that's what I took away. I didn't think that there was a real contradiction between what you say and what Odell is saying, because I thought what Odell was saying, that we're not going to privilege territory that is separate and apart, so that we submerge these processes, that the processes are what's important, and they can take place within a people who are oppressed inside a nation state composed not of their people and a foreign territory. And so I think that's what he was trying to do, was square that. And what you're saying is that at the end of the day, internally, there's still going to be a territorial difference, and we got to pay attention to that. And I want to come back there, but I want to read this quote and get your response to this quote from Keeanga Yamaka Taylor. And this is her book on Black Lives Matter, but she sees the need to attack internal colonial theory. So on page 196, she says, it was, however, inaccurate to describe Black Americans' relationship to the United States as colonial. Despite these obvious similarities, the profits reaped from the exploitation of Black urban dwellers were not insignificant, but neither were they the important revenue streams back to the American electoral code. The outflow of capital from the inner city worked almost exclusively to the benefit of the layer of business owners directly involved in economically exploitative relationships with the urban ghetto, such as bankers and real estate agents. This was not a motor of American capitalism compared to the cotton, rubber, sugar, and mineral extraction and trade that had fueled colonial empires for hundreds of years. End quote. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, it's basically that's basically the argument I already talked about. Is that the allegation of, well, there's no super profit, so therefore it's not a colony. Okay,
but I need you to show why it's wrong.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that the first of all, what is the amount that calculates to being exploitative amount that we can recognize the colony from. And okay, so I haven't calculated that, but when I was doing my dissertation and working on this, I was like, okay, what's the smallest colony? Oh, it's the Pitcairn Islands, 17 square miles, 44 square kilometers. What's the largest colony?
What's a cash crop? I mean, what do they produce? What's the minimum?
Let me finish this now.
Okay.
The largest one is Angola. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Mm-hmm. So, what is the common element? The administrative convenience of the colonizer is the common element in defining the size of the colony. Remember, this is an extension of the colonizer's framework that the colony is. That's what defines what a colony is the settler's administrative convenience.
Okay, good. I like that point, because what she's doing is a kind of economic reductionism, and it comes down to bankers and real estate, when in fact, what about political subjugation? The fact that the first thing we lost as a people was sovereignty, the right to self-determination. And we see that on, and I want to bring this up a little bit later. What about culture? What about the social relationship in terms of ostracism? But even what I find interesting is that there's no discussion about labor. And even if one wants to reject super exploitation thesis, there is exploitation going on in terms of Black workers every day in every historical period. And the majority, the overwhelming, the modal experience for African Americans has been as a working class, meaning the most frequently occurring experience has been as a working class. So I found that odd.
Well, I agree. But again, I pointed out that if you don't have a grasp of the class relationships in a population, you really don't have a good grasp of what is going on. So that you have to make a class analysis to understand of the Black community in order to understand all the conditions. And I found I was looking for a Black history of history of Black class relations over 4 centuries. Couldn't find it. It did not exist.
Right.
Why? Well, part of it is practical contribution.
Recently became a category, or I should say, a relationship of investigation for people who write on the African American community.
Well, no, but actually, it's a much more fundamental problem with social science. Upper class, middle class, underclass has to be operationally defined each time we use it. So who's going to do over 4 centuries? Who's going to do 25 or 50 definitions that change? It's that's absurd on its face. So they're not even going to attempt it. So it doesn't get done. So there is no class analysis of that because that's the dominant frame of how to look at class when it's even looked at.
But there's also the notion that people argue, even Black leftists argue, that class is an insignificant category for Black folk until after World War II. So you got that kind of bias. But of course it's not, but I'm saying that you have people who make that argument. I want to go to the last question for you. Okay, this
is your program, so you go ahead.
Contemporary situation. I appreciate that. You weren't always so easy. Robert Allen.
Just day. I mean, I work with y'all.
I know. We were often on the same side in the BRC. It's something we didn't get to discuss, that formation. But
over time, perhaps. Yeah.
On this question of Robert Allen and the notion that in the 60s and 70s, the U.S. state and corporate liberals were shifting Black America from a colony to a neo-colony, with the neo-colony being that Black people would come to govern the areas in which they were the majority or a near majority, plurality, right? And thus they come to have some control. And the movement of Black people into the technical, managerial sector and professional sector of the economy. And you talk about this in your dissertation, that as we see Black people expand into those areas, we see Black folks getting some control over social welfare agencies and other reproductive services in the Black community, that the Black bourgeoisie, the Black paid bourgeoisie get some control over that. And so that he and his organization transformed to a neo-colony. And I think you, based on my read of your work, you agree with that. So I agree with that. So now the question is this. Voter suppression as the main strategy of the Republican Party from the selection of George Bush in 2000 to now, the attack on the gerrymandering to shrink the political power of Black folks by locating Black people overwhelmingly in one voting district so that you end up with much smaller representation than you would have if Black people weren't gerrymandered, right? And even though at this moment, Black people occupy the mayorships of the 4 largest cities in the country, we've actually seen in terms of mayorships a shrinkage, right? The events in Tennessee, where they expelled the 2 Black representatives, should that become dominant, could we argue that the thrust since Reagan has been to turn the neo-colony back into a straightforward colony?
I would argue no.
Okay.
I'll say why. I think that, look, fundamentally the neo-colony has a great deal of utility because it's a misdirection of enough people to counteract the possibility of a true transformational situation among broad masses of people. That's the way it's conceived of by.
But that would make sense for the liberals, and particularly the corporate liberals that Alan talked about, but the fascists that seem to be in control of the U.S. state.
And we'll say, okay, look, this is a much different question, because you're talking about the contestation of control by which is philosophically, which is a more useful form of control, neoliberalism or neo-fascism.
Yeah.
So okay, that's really at the root of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking you.
And
Trump forces don't want Black people represented.
The mastery of this is that the bourgeoisie gets us fighting with other working people and mass classes about this instead of targeting them. And so there's members of the bourgeoisie on both sides of that question, and they're all happy that it's not particularly decided contest because as long the profits are rolling in first and foremost. So they're definitely quite comfortable with that. As it certainly there's always going to be an issue. However, you've got to remember that gerrymandering is not restricted to the Black community. That's a systematic policy that they do for every. This is not about the South. It's about how to empower the Republican Party. Period.
Right, but we're talking about its impact, and it's a dominant policy in regard to black folk.
Well,
Right.
it's not just black folk. It's a dominant policy in regard to dealing with any people who are voting Democratic. They're gerrymandering everybody.
True.
And so what I'm saying is that the
But the other people are also colonized. Because we're talking about the Mexicanos.
That's right. But what I'm saying is that this is it's part of this contestation about which form of bourgeois rule is going to triumph. And as long as that they're happy with that internal contest, because it's not about us the Black power or Chicano power, etc., defining the framework. It's not about the immigrants defining the framework. So they're happy. They're both sides are happy, relatively speaking, to have it be that contestation, in my view. Remember, this is the if we are going to get to end internal colonies, I would love it if we could do it under capitalism, but I don't see how. It's not gonna. It's not. I don't see that happening. But because and part of it's because of this contest that they got a huge portion of the white mass classes are wrapped up in this false consciousness that they're going, working against their own interests and don't even know it. And as long as they've got that kind of ideological control, but enter China is in terms of as another capitalist country, and we're sweating.
Don't go there. I got a question from the audience.
Well, I'm sorry.
We might run a little bit over, but here's the question from the audience that I've been able to identify, and it's from Carl Arnicus. And what they want to know is they want a curriculum on decolonization. They want a curriculum to decolonize. We know you're going to recommend The Wretched of the Earth by Fanon. We know you're going to recommend The Rebellion in Newark, and that's who's the SDS guy who wrote that?
That's Tom Hayden.
Tom Hayden, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a reading them in tandem. It's a great way to marry Fanon to the U.S. experience, and it's a thin book, so it's not a big book. So, but you could probably
what would you give this person that's looking for a curriculum?
I'm not aware that there is one right now. I mean, people say,
well, there isn't one. But if you're giving her a list of
I'll put it on my list of stuff to work on. But unfortunately I've got it's kind of long right now because I've got some more immediate stuff that I'm trying to do. You see my No.
I'm just asking you to give her, or it might be a him. Give them a couple of more books that you believe are articles that you believe are essential in the construction of a curriculum to decolonize.
Okay. Let's see. I'll just say there's one chapter by Albert Memmi in The Colonizer and the Colonized that talks about the image of the colonized in the mind of the colonizer. And then we're talking about North Africans, and you read that and you swear they're talking about people in the Deep South. Okay. You're lazy, shiftless, blah, 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 all of the stereotypes that get associated. And you look at that and you say, if you didn't know that it was being applied to North Africans, so this is the I'll just say it's the Eurocentric stereotype that, you know, you're all the things that we hate. That's what we think you are because you're different. So that would be one particular one that comes to mind. I mean, certainly Black Power is a beginning, but you know, then looking at the question of what, you know, he talks about this question of they talk about the question of Kwame Ture and um, uh, the other author. I'm blanking for his name right now. Charles. Yeah. Anyway, they talk about temporary basis for separatism, not permanent separatism. Temporary. That's a tactical question. So it's a tactical question. So, and that needs to be paid attention to. But they basically, people, once that was the first book to define Black Power, then people went off in all kinds of different directions without really defining that, I think, enough. So those are two of the things that come to my mind. I think it's a great question, and I'm going to have to devote some thought to it, and ask some for friends of mine who sometimes mentor me on, or have mentored me in the past on this question, on the question of internal colonialism as well. But thinking more about what would be a decolonization reading list.
Yeah, that's
and keep in mind, I am speaking of decolonization as an imperial project. I'm not talking about this post-colonial stuff.
I would like to tap into that because I refuse to use the term because I don't think
I agree with you.
neo-colonialism.
Look at the first two paragraphs of my piece toward a new theory of internal colonialism. I thoroughly take it apart.
Yeah.
I'm just to get down into the weeds.
Okay, so I'm going to just read a statement from boy, this is moving kind of fast. Let me pull back. Yeah, we're going to bring it to an end. There was an argument that braiding sweetgrass. Let me find it so I don't mess this up.
Wow, I wish I could see what
braiding sweetgrass is a decolonial text.
What's that?
The book is entitled "Braiding Sweetgrass." I don't have an author, but Big Teal put this in. Maybe he can put in the author. That's a decolonial text. I'm not familiar with it, but that's one of the clear suggestions that it be added and seen as a decolonial text.
Let me reframe it. Let me frame this. So I consider myself an anti-colonial Marxist.
Yeah.
And there's a pantheon of anti-colonial Marxists that you should keep in mind when you ask that question. You're talking about Amilcar Cabral. You know, of course, Frantz Fanon. You're talking about Kwame Nkrumah. You're talking about Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. You're talking about Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh. Who else did you say?
This is C.L.R. James.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about anti-colonial Marxism. It's a distinct field, but of course, the Eurocentrics among many white Marxists really can't bring themselves to say that it's a distinct stage of Marxism. Okay, and if you're asking the question and even looking at with fairly traditional eyes as a Marxist, and looking at the world and say, where's the next breakthrough going to be? My answer for a couple decades now has been probably in West Asia. I do not use the term Middle East. It's too Eurocentric. But West Asia has been in high contention for a very long time, and the Kurds have been doing a great job, in my view. And I'm not saying that they haven't had shortcomings, but I would so keep it think about those, think about that as a part of the framework of decolonization as well.
Totally agree. And so we need to bring this to a halt. But let me ask you if you have any summatory comments that you want to make, or anything that you want to alert people to that's forthcoming from yourself.
Well, I promised myself that my first project, after I finish this semester, is going to be working on a Marxist critique of intercommunalism, Huey's theory. Okay, and that's because there are actually organizations that are founding themselves as that in the past few years. There's at least one, and so I want them to be able to see. Wait a minute, is this really what you want? And think about the true context of intercommunalism, and before you unabashedly embrace it. So that's that. That, and then there's a more general piece on the Panthers, and from an anti-colonial Marxist critique of the Panthers. Those two things I need to get done, and then I'll go back to pressing on internal colonialism. And to me, this is a long struggle, because there's so many definitions out there, first of all, and but I'm clear that there's a distinction that can be made from the previous versions and the one I'm looking at, and I feel strongly that I can sit down and thoroughly address the questions that anybody has to raise about why it's supposedly not valid, because they're going to have to answer the questions about why it doesn't apply. Where did we stop becoming colonized? How? What's the process? Etc. So I'll leave it like that.
Brother Cappy, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You've kept the attention of the audience, and I'm looking forward to rewatching. I know that you dropped what the young people call jewels. I have a problem with their language, but you dropped things that people appreciate, that we will learn from. So I appreciate having you, man. I'm gonna have to have you back so we can talk about the BRC, because I think it's the lack of knowledge about the BRC process has become a hindrance in the political development of this new generation, that it's a missing link in the Black radical experience. So my brother, let us say, I want to thank the audience as always. This has been Dr. Sundiata Cha-Jua with Dr. Charles Cappy Pinderhughes on RealTalk.
I'll just say, I've been saying since 1974, take it light, but take it.
All right, my brother. Take care. We're going to sign off now.